Hello again and welcome back to my channel. My name is Kate. Here I have more from Bloodlines, Chupacabra, Chapter 3, The Defiant One. If you have been tuning in for these short videos, I hope that you are enjoying this so far, and if you do like this, please hit the like and subscribe button to hear more content from Bloodlines Chupacabra and receive notifications as I upload each video. Chapter 3, The Defiant One, Part 1. As the campers ease back into their chairs, Cal lets out a soft sigh, rolling his eyes, realizing Laura is one of those people that clearly cannot just relax. Sandra, seeing the real Laura emerge, threw a little shade, muttering under her breath, "I can see why her ex cheated, she's nuts." Sandra then narrows her eyes, thinking about why Laura had really come on this trip. Sandra, however, seems to be enjoying the setting along with Cal, as the ranger continues to be interrupted on occasion by the city folk. Sandra notices Cal's gaze on Laura. As her eyes scan, she then spots the Bible tightly clutched in Laura's hand, half hidden by the blanket she has seemingly cocooned herself in. The campfire starts to flicker a bit, showing a few flames but more embers than not. Getting up from his chair, he heads over to the pile of firewood from alongside Larry's tent. As Cal throws another log into the fire pit and looks at Larry, asking him to please continue, and apologizes for the rude interruptions. "No need to apologize," says Larry. "I understand that not everyone is going to believe my story, and to be honest, I tell it to campers all of the time. It's part of the experience, and thought perhaps you lot might have enjoyed the tale as well. I apologize. I have no intentions of offending anyone at all." Sandra scoffs. "A Bible? Really? You just didn't seem the conservative type, Laura. I am actually surprised and disappointed. No wonder you're so uptight. The devil isn't out here, and a story is just a story, no different than the ones in your Bible." Laura was visibly upset and felt bullied just because she had faith in God and didn't believe in ghost stories. She felt justified in her beliefs and ignored Sandra. "Yes, I am a little bit rattled. But also, I do not believe in something so out there. I mean, really, a chupacabra, though it's great, but fiction. Look, Larry, and I don't mean to be a killjoy, and I love the history of this valley, but going as far to say that an actual cryptid existed is a bit too far-fetched." Sandra retorted, "Can you at least let Larry finish, Laura? We, unlike you, actually are into this, and I do find it quite fascinating, and I love mythology and lore. So do a favor, just let him finish, okay?" says Cal. Laura rolls her eyes a bit, then puts her hands out as if to say, okay, although to Sandra the gesture seemed a bit rude, and Laura quickly curls back up into her cocoon, clutching her Bible. "Oh, for fuck's sake, why don't we let him finish, okay?" Giving Laura yet another rather stern side glare, Sandra looks back over to Larry. "Please do go on. I can't wait to hear the rest of this story." She leans forward, her eyes wide like an eager child waiting for Santa Claus on Christmas. Cal takes his hands, patting his legs, noting his agitation. "Sounds good to me. I mean, shouldn't we know more about it rather than brushing it off anyway, Laura?" Laura throws her hand up. "Oh no, leave me out of it this time. I said my piece and what I needed say." Sandra cuts in just after Cal, rudely I might add. "Nice attitude," with a hand gesture. "We get it, okay? Not your thing." Sandra looks at Cal and replying to what he had just said before. Laura rudely, once again, acting like a child, she thought. Exactly. This is a part of the ancient lore within this valley, and I can't get enough of the rich history here. Larry was pretty tired at this point, though sought no need to further delegate a ridiculous argument. "I am going to tell you that it was the beast itself. I swear to you all that I wouldn't lie about this, and I kid you not. My grandfather swore up and down it kept him in fear so bad for the rest of his life. That foul thing you do not want to mess with." Larry takes a deep breath, his eyes red and sullen, the circles apparent under his eyes. This man did not sleep well, so how could this be a mere tale? He begins to speak up, and as he is about to just start to continue the story, everyone is alarmed by a sudden shriek in the distance. "Okay, I could definitely do without that," says Laura. It unnerved even the seasoned ranger to the core so much, and yet he tells this story year after year to hikers. Maybe in Ranger Whitfield's mind, he's in a sense trying to warn people. The thing is, what no one noticed was Larry's composure. Every time a howl or moan was heard, Laura noticed that he seemed distressed, as he kept trying to calm them down when he didn't seem to be able to himself. No doubt the ranger, as stoic as he was, had no reassurance to ease his own reluctance to admit it. He felt it, though he'd not say a word to any of the three campers. Oh, must be the Chupacabra, Laura. Cal should have known better, but he couldn't help himself. It seemed Laura was an easy target, and it didn't help that she made it easy for him to take jabs at her. Sandra was trying to hide her quiet laughter by biting down on her lip. Cal, don't tease her, just let her be. Laura sat straight up in her chair, held her head high, and exclaimed, It's fine, I'll ignore that. She narrows her eyes at Cal, then goes back to looking down at her Bible. Larry, wanting to get back on track after the bickering had finally simmered down, put his hands on his knees, waiting to interject and continue. My grandfather, along with his brothers, had decided to just bury the carcass and forget about it as soon as they finished, and started on back to their farm. The strangest thing occurred. Right after something no one has seen in years, a cult of Blackfire that once inhabited this farming town that still exists, made their return preaching. He led his sermons in tents in the open air and roamed about from town to town, wearing a wide-brimmed black felt hat, no matter the weather, would stand in the middle of the town square with his satanic Bible in one hand. He loved putting on a show for the townsfolk. He would preach about how any person breaking the laws would suffer great tragedies, and crops would fail, animals would die, and some would be found headless, and called people out on their sin and greed for the reason these things were happening. I suspect he had a hand in it, as most of the townsfolk did. They had a meeting one night and decided to run this man off for good, relieving them of this devil in the flesh. But he did not leave. Instead, he set up a camp just on the outskirts of this town, and there he kept on preaching about the world ending, never letting go of his satanic Bible. Some say he even smeared it the blood of the headless animals. People would scoff and boo the man, yet he never flinched. The townsfolk words seemed to bounce off of his, and he'd stare down even the most God-fearing people with his piercing black eyes. Some folks even began to spread rumors the devil himself had come to town. Kids would run screaming as he'd pull his wagon in, filled with a few of his followers, a bunch of sickly-looking folks, dead-eyed and hollow. He claimed that women would give birth to have reptilian offspring that wouldn't live past a few hours, and yet they kept coming up with new prophecies about the end of the world. The townsfolk had enough of him and his creepy cult, so the men in town decided to sneak out in the middle of the night, setting their camp ablaze, which seemed to solve the problem, or so they thought. In the midst of the attack, this preacher, that devil, had been murdered. No one knows for sure who had done it, but it's said that he was buried outside of that town, and the very spot that he was buried in, folks said no grass would grow there. What happened? Did he pop back up like the Walking Dead? Laura says, as she still believes it's just a tall tale, not fact. No, ma'am, Miss Gray. It was as if Hades himself rose up from hell after he was buried. The sky turned black instantly. Clouds rolled in like ocean waves. The wind was fierce as it kicked up a storm, just howling like a demon. My grandfather and great-uncles hid in the storm cellar, expecting a tornado. Miss Gray was a religious woman. Her thoughts turned into utter disbelief at the thought that people would actually buy into such a cryptid fairy tale, and some dead preacher spewing the woes of Armageddon. Laura didn't want to admit to her fellow campers, nor give any sign that she wasn't having any of this nonsense. Nor was she feeling particularly well. Her stomach churned as a bitter taste rose up in her throat, as if she was about to vomit. Cal and Sandra sat close to the aged ranger, their ears alert and waiting for what Ranger Larry was going to tell them next. Eyes wide open, you could see the excitement, the sheer anticipation, so eager they had to know. As Larry was about to continue, a noise in the dark caught his attention, shifting a low groan and then a snort from Biddy. Something had her so distressed. Whatever it was had caught her attention as she swayed back and forth, trying to break free of her post and run. The noise was so loud that it broke Larry's concentration. It was then the campers noticed that the old mare had become so agitated she was pulling at her reins almost as if to get her halter off completely. As she paced back and forth wildly, tugging at the ropes for a good 5 minutes at least, then stood still. Larry and the three campers caught a glimpse from the fire as Biddy lifted her head, then rearing up on her hind legs, a sound like thunder crashing as her hooves hit the ground violently. Clearly, she had sensed something out in the desert and was showing signs of distress. Larry figured it was just a few coyotes out on the hunt. Horses weren't too fond of them. He figured being the age Biddy was had to account for her feeling uneasy as well. Cal stood up and looked at the members of the camping group. At this point, Laura had been trying to ignore the seemingly neurotic horse, she thought. Behavioral issues, Laura thought as she passed it off as an old horse just being a bit dumb. She kept noticing as the campers, Sandra and Cal, seemed so entranced by their guide's tale that she didn't notice that the group was now being watched. Cal, the other male member of the group, spoke up, and showing general concern for the animal's well-being. He could not ignore that the horse was visibly anxious, and decided to go check on the distressed horse. "Hey Larry, now that animal of yours is really shifting around over there. Listen, I'm going to take a look. For all we know, she could just be bothered by the commotion around the fire. Horses can be jumpy. I imagine at her age she probably a bit senile," says Cal with a clear look of concern on his face. Sandra wasn't too bothered by the mare. "I'm sure it's nothing, probably just hungry again." Larry, on the other hand, felt it was just her age, and shadows can have an effect on the eyesight, and the way a horse sees was just having an effect, as much as the coyotes in the distance were causing her to be so jumpy. "No, I don't think so. She had a few apples as we trekked up this pass to this very spot, and gave her good grain that should sustain her for a while, at least until 6 a.m. when I feed her again. Gotta keep on schedule." Sandra was sure it had just been the scent of coyotes that had gotten Biddy so agitated. Nonetheless, she wasn't about to go and find out. "Sure, is restless though, and she's been jumpy since sundown. Cal already checked her hooves, and she has been fed, so I really don't understand what could be bothering her. The coyotes aren't close, and I haven't heard anything in a while." Laura couldn't help but theorize what could have this old pony so scared, but it started to bother her. There was as much concern as there was disbelief. Laura had no intention of letting some silly story get her all riled up. Laura thought, maybe she is just scared of the shadows from the fire, like Larry had said. Cal crosses his arms and looks Laura directly in the eye. "Still don't believe, huh? Well, how about this then? You explain why that horse senses something about that we can't see." Laura, feeling uncomfortable, feels a chill around her, even as close as she is to the fire. She can't shake it, pulling her blanket up to her chin. Laura felt the sudden temperature drop quite dramatically, yet no one else there seems to be bothered. "Wow, she says there is a real chill in the air tonight." "Yes, Miss Gray, the desert is quite an incredible place. You definitely want to know that it can get to almost freezing temps. I know it can be quite a drop from what the temps are during the day," says Larry as he reminds everyone of the extra heaters he had brought with him. "Temp's fine, it doesn't bother me much. A small space heater and fan are all I need." "So, what happened next? I'm dying over here. Now the only thing that I want to know is what happened after your granddad and uncles burying the corpse of whatever it you found." Sandra was quite comfortable. The fire was perfect, and she was not bothered one bit. She was from Wisconsin after, and winters there could be brutal. She was also an avid skier and used to freezing temps. Larry, glad to finally continue, spoke up, recanting what he had previously told them, nearly forgetting where he'd left off before. "According to my grandfather and great-uncles, the three of them did not return alone. Something else had followed them." Sandra was relaxed, her elbow on her knee, with her hand cupped just underneath her chin. Laura was now sitting rigid in her fold-out chair, clutching her Bible. Cal sat stone-faced, even finding that his voice was trembling, daring to ask what happened next. Larry continued. "Well, as they settled down for the night, the three of them sat by the fireplace drinking some rot-gut whiskey. My youngest great-uncle had made a week earlier. About a quarter past the hour of midnight, the weather had turned sour. High winds and heavy rain started beating hard against the ground and pelting the windows with hail, so they decided to call it a night and retreated to their rooms. But no one would be sleeping peacefully that night, not that night, or ever really." Sandra gasped. "You really are being serious? Okay, I believe it. Now that's a bit too detailed at this point." Sandra recoiled into her chair a bit, and yet, as the same Cal who was also stone-faced but intent on hearing the tale though. Even Laura and Cal were secured into their chairs, Laura still holding that damned book, with Sandra thinking, "What a doink, geez, relax, lady, damn." As soon as the last man went to bed, there was a faint noise. Just a soft scratching from just outside the living room window were all that could be heard over the violent storm. My great aunt, who was 17 at the time, came into the room saying that she had heard a low moan and scratching outside of her bedroom window. She was visibly frightened and pale as she tried to breathe, exclaiming that something had been scratching at the walls while she had tried to sleep. Her room, which was on the second floor of the house, could easily have been explained as a tree branch hitting the side of the house, scraping along the window. Problem was there was no tree on that side of the house. She stared blankly at my grandfather, believing he thought she'd had a bad dream, and told her to go back to bed. Now my granddad told my uncles that it was just the sound of hail against the house causing the ruckus, says Larry. My great aunt never fell asleep that night, as the sound of the scratching became so unbearable that she grabbed a cross that had been nailed to the wall right off and held onto it through the entire night. Trees, perhaps, or a bush, maybe scraping the house, I mean, the sound could have traveled up, right? Sandra couldn't help but feel a bit sorry for Laura at this point. Bible or not, the poor woman looked so pale in the firelight. Nah, says Cal, even a tree branch or bush couldn't have been. Even with resonance, that wouldn't have caused it to be so loud that it scared that poor girl that bad. But it had to be. I mean, let's be real. Her? No way something other than a cat is going to climb up a tree, so, Laura says as she stares at Larry, and his face was not flinching. Larry looked up at them, sweat upon his brow as he looked worried, almost as if he were about to shed tears of fear. The story he was telling was causing him distress. Ladies, look, I don't think I should go on, honestly. I don't want to cause for alarm here. It is not my intention. Larry starts to wonder if telling them this story may have been the wrong idea. Are you sure about that? I don't know. I think I'll just turn in. I really do not believe that any of this actually happened. No offense, Larry. Laura looks at her three companions, finding no comfort. But go on, whatever. Laura makes a slight eye roll and decides to start reading another book she had brought with her, but the Bible tucked deep into the folds of her blanket now. The hell, Laura, says Sandra. We are not a bunch of children here. Grow up, really. She shoots a narrowed-eyed glance at Laura, shakes her head, then looks back at Larry. So sorry, Larry, please continue. Laura's face turns red with anger. She's had enough of the bullshit and constant cheap shots from Sandra's poking fun at her. She crosses her arms in protest, hoping Sandra would just shut her damn mouth and leave her alone. Cal was so annoyed by the two of them, though he figured he had to say something. Look, gals, I want to hear this. I'm not about to be scared by some old-ass cat climbing up a damn tree. I have seen and heard worse real-life things in the Marines, but, damn it, I want to hear this. Both women had stopped arguing just long enough. Sandra was just sick of Laura's whining. She'd thought Cal had been wrong to get mad at her, too. Sandra didn't care. Whatever it took to get Laura to just shut the fuck up was fine by her, even if he did yell at both of them. Laura was pissed off. How dare he yell at her? Wait, who do you think you are, huh? Cal shook his head. Can you just settle down? Jeez. Seriously, why did you come on this trip if you were just going to be so negative? That's nobody's damn business but mine, Cal. Laura looked at him with daggers in her eyes as she sat in her chair feeling attacked. Her boyfriend had cheated on her, and feeling vulnerable enough as she was didn't need him yelling at her. A tear fell from her eyes as she sat back, realizing that she'd made a mistake. What started as a hope for her had soured into an unbelievable nightmare. She felt alone and isolated. Larry chimed in, hoping to settle this situation. Okay, settle down now. Okay, everyone just chill, okay, let's not argue, okay? We came out here to relax, and so be respectful and let him finish. Sandra had been drinking quite a bit, noticing that she had polished off the bottle. Sandra hadn't intended on getting shit-faced, but with the escalating stress from Laura, she hadn't even noticed how much she had drank. Cal looks over to Larry and nods for him to continue. The looks on everyone's face at this point had all started to turn more serious and composed as they sat back into their chairs. Before Larry would begin again, he noticed the air grew colder, the atmosphere heavier somehow. The half-moon was hidden behind partial clouds, so the only light being the fire flickering. Eventually, as the campers settled in, the fire flickered one last time, before a gust of wind had extinguished it completely, and all you could hear was a low, guttural sound, followed by an eerie howl in the distance. As the two women sat straight up, the hairs on their arms stiffened, as if lighting had run through them. Larry reignited it with a propane torch, and couldn't understand how a small wind could have. It was bizarre, but he thought the wood must have been a bit damp or something. I am not sure how well our campers could have slept that night, though I can tell you this, one of them wouldn't. Not one of them had even noticed, in the melee of the argument, that Biddy, the old chestnut mare, had broken away from the lead, tied to a stake in the ground, and had wandered off, not knowing she may have well become prey for the late-night roaming band of coyotes, or even worse, the victim of the Chupacabra. End Bloodlines Chupacabra. Chapter 3, Part 1, The Defiant, Part 2. If you stayed to listen into this, thank you, and hope that you can sleep peacefully as you lay down your head for the night, or you might want to keep a nightlight on, you know, just in case you hear a bump or scratch in the middle of the night. Till we meet next time, stay safe.